Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2012 when Ranger Daniel Mitchell began his final patrol in the Never Summer Mountains of northern Colorado. The air had grown crisp with the first hints of winter, and the aspens had shed their golden leaves, leaving the forest floor carpeted in a rustling blanket. Mitchell had worked these trails for 7 seasons, knowing every ridge and valley as if they were parts of his own body. That Tuesday morning began like any other autumn day in the high country, with the thin mountain air carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The ranger station at the base of the mountains had been quiet when he departed at 7:15 a.m., logging his intended route through the radio before the static of the high elevations would make communication impossible. The trail to Mount Richthofen wound through dense forests of Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir, their dark branches creating cathedral-like arches overhead. Mitchell moved with practiced efficiency, his worn boots finding purchase on the familiar terrain. By midday, he had reached the tree line, where the landscape opened to vast alpine meadows dotted with granite boulders left behind by retreating glaciers millennia ago. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue that seemed almost too bright for the season. It was here, at approximately 12,100 feet, that Mitchell made his last radio transmission at 11:42 a.m., reporting unusual stillness in the area, no bird calls, no wind, no wildlife sounds. "It's like the whole mountain is holding its breath." His voice crackled through the radio before cutting off abruptly. 3 days later, when Mitchell failed to return to the station, a search party was organized. The Rocky Mountain National Park Service coordinated with Larimer County Search and Rescue, deploying teams across the ranger's intended route. What they found only deepened the mystery. At 2:17 p.m., on the third day, searchers discovered Mitchell's truck parked exactly where he had left it, his pack still inside. But the vehicle was locked from the outside. His radio equipment remained intact, powered on, though the battery had died. The most disturbing discovery came when they located his tracks, which followed the trail for several miles before abruptly ending in the middle of an open meadow, with no signs of struggle, no indication of where he might have gone, and no tracks leading away from the spot where his footprints simply ceased to exist. The official investigation, documented in case file RMNP 12847, revealed several anomalies that defied logical explanation. Weather reports from that day confirmed clear conditions with no sudden storms that might have disoriented the experienced ranger. Search dogs refused to approach the area where Mitchell's tracks ended, whimpering and pulling back despite their handlers' commands. Multiple searchers reported experiencing sudden temperature drops in the meadow, some describing a profound silence that felt heavy and oppressive. The most chilling testimony came from veteran searcher Jim Harlow, who claimed to have heard what sounded like Mitchell's voice calling his name from a distance. Though, when he responded, the voice simply laughed a sound he described as like stones grinding together, before fading into the unnatural quiet of the mountain. No trace of Daniel Mitchell was ever found beyond those final footprints in the meadow. The search was officially called off after 10 days, with the Park Service concluding that the ranger had likely become disoriented and succumbed to the elements. Though privately, none of the searchers believed this explanation. Mitchell's file remains open at the Larimer County Sheriff's Office, classified as a missing person case with no leads. 5 years after his disappearance, a hiker discovered Mitchell's ranger badge lying on a rock in the meadow, where his tracks had ended, its metal polished to an unnatural shine, as if recently handled. Forensic analysis found no DNA or fingerprints other than Mitchell's own, and no explanation for how the badge had appeared in a location that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. The badge now sits in a locked evidence room, a silent testament to a mystery that the Colorado Rockies refuse to surrender. Hundreds of miles away in the San Juan Mountains, another ranger was about to discover that silence can be deafening. It was early November of 2015 when Ranger Sarah Chen began noticing the irregularities in the radio communications at her isolated outpost near the Uncompahgre Wilderness. Chen had taken the position seeking solitude after a career in urban law enforcement, finding comfort in the remote beauty of southwestern Colorado. The radio was her lifeline to the outside world, connecting her to dispatch in Montrose and to the few other rangers patrolling the vast wilderness area. The first strange transmission came through at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, cutting through the normal chatter with a voice that didn't belong to any known ranger or emergency responder. The voice spoke in measured tones, reciting coordinates that didn't correspond to any known location in the park system, followed by what sounded like a child counting backwards from 10 in a language Chen couldn't identify. The broadcasts continued nightly for 3 weeks, always between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m., always following the same pattern. Coordinates, the child's voice counting, then a period of static that resolved into what sounded like footsteps in snow, followed by a door closing. Chen documented each transmission, noting the technical details in her logbook while trying to identify the source. What troubled her most was that the transmissions seemed to be coming from her own radio frequency. Yet, none of the equipment showed any signs of tampering or malfunction. The Montrose dispatch confirmed they were not receiving these broadcasts, suggesting they were localized phenomena. When Chen played recordings for her supervisor, he dismissed them as atmospheric interference or possible pirate radio operators, though he couldn't explain the consistent pattern or the unsettling quality of the transmissions. On the night of November 23rd, Chen decided to investigate the coordinates being broadcast, taking her GPS and hiking into the frozen wilderness after dark. The coordinates led her deep into the Uncompahgre National Forest, to an area she knew well, a small clearing where an old fire lookout tower had stood until it was dismantled in the 1970s. When she arrived at approximately 10:05 p.m., her radio suddenly came to life, with the familiar voice reciting coordinates that matched exactly where she stood. As the child's voice began counting, Chen noticed something impossible. Despite the clear night sky, snow began falling around her, though none accumulated on the ground. She described in her report the sensation of being watched by something just beyond her peripheral vision, a presence that seemed to grow more tangible as the counting approached 0. When the child's voice reached 1, Chen experienced what she later described as a complete sensory distortion. The world around her seemed to ripple like heat haze, the trees bending in impossible directions, the stars above swirling into patterns that hurt her eyes. The sound of footsteps came from all directions at once, though the snow beneath her feet remained undisturbed. As the door slammed shut in her radio, Chen felt an intense cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air, a cold that seemed to emanate from inside her own body. She fumbled for her sidearm, turning in circles, but seeing nothing in the beam of her flashlight except the trees standing exactly as they should be, motionless and ordinary. The entire episode lasted no more than 30 seconds, but when it passed, Chen found herself kneeling in the snow, her radio silent, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The aftermath of Chen's experience was documented in Incident Report 15-734B, filed with the Montrose County Sheriff's Department. Chen was found the next morning by a hiker who reported seeing her flashlight signaling from the clearing. She was disoriented and suffering from mild hypothermia, but otherwise unharmed. Her radio was dead, its battery inexplicably drained despite having been fully charged when she left her outpost. The GPS device showed no record of her journey to the clearing, though the coordinates were manually entered. Most disturbing was Chen's discovery that the snowfall she had witnessed had left a perfect circle of moisture around the perimeter of the clearing, with the ground inside remaining bone dry. The mysterious broadcasts ceased after that night, never to be heard again. Chen requested a transfer 2 weeks later, leaving the Colorado Park Service entirely within 6 months. The official explanation remains unidentified radio interference. But those who reviewed her case privately acknowledge that something occurred in that clearing that defies conventional understanding. It was just after midnight on August 8, 2017, when Ranger Michael Torres was completing his final patrol of the day on Mount Evans, home to the highest paved road in North America. The summer season had brought unusually heavy traffic to the area, with tourists hoping to catch glimpses of mountain goats and bighorn sheep against the backdrop of the Continental Divide. Torres had worked late, dealing with a stranded vehicle at Summit Lake, and was now driving the winding road back down toward Idaho Springs. The sky was exceptionally clear, offering an unobstructed view of the Milky Way arching above the jagged peaks. At 12:17 a.m., as he rounded a curve near the ruins of the old Crest House, Torres noticed something that made him pull his vehicle to the shoulder, a series of lights moving in formation across the face of the peak opposite his position. The lights were unlike anything Torres had seen in his 15 years with the Park Service. They moved silently in a perfect triangular pattern, each light maintaining an equal distance from the others. There was no sound of aircraft, no navigation lights, no indication of conventional aviation equipment. Torres grabbed his binoculars from the glove compartment, observing the phenomenon for approximately 7 minutes. The lights appeared to be approximately 200 feet in diameter, moving at what he estimated to be 30 miles per hour across the sheer face of the mountain. When he attempted to radio dispatch, his equipment emitted only static, though it had functioned perfectly minutes earlier. Torres watched as the lights suddenly stopped moving, hovered in place for approximately 30 seconds, then shot straight upward at an impossible speed, disappearing from view within seconds. Torres filed an official report the next morning, documenting what he had witnessed in detail. The report, archived under reference ME 2017-0842, includes sketches of the light formation and Torres's professional assessment of the phenomenon. Several other witnesses came forward in the following days, including a group of astronomers who had been stargaming at Summit Lake and a family camping in the area. All described seeing the same formation of lights, with similar details about their silent movement and impossible acceleration. The Federal Aviation Administration conducted an investigation, but found no records of aircraft, military or civilian, operating in the area at that time. Weather balloon data showed no launches that could explain the phenomenon, and satellite imagery revealed nothing unusual. The most compelling evidence came from an amateur photographer who had been taking long exposure shots of the night sky from a vantage point near Echo Lake. Her camera captured the lights in multiple frames, showing their movement across the mountain face in a series of streaks that defied explanation. When the images were analyzed by experts at the Denver Museum of Nature Science, they concluded that the ETH's lights were moving in ways that no known aircraft or natural phenomenon could achieve. The photographs were eventually published in a minor scientific journal, sparking brief interest before being dismissed by mainstream researchers as camera artifacts or deliberate hoaxes. Torres, however, maintained the accuracy of his observation until his retirement from the Park Service in 2021. What makes the Mount Evans incident particularly disturbing is not just the unexplained nature of the lights, but the subsequent events that unfolded over the following months. 3 weeks after Torres's sighting, A group of hikers reported finding a perfectly circular patch of ground, approximately 50 feet in diameter, near where the lights had been observed. The vegetation within the circle was burned to a uniform height of 1 inch, with no signs of scorching on the surrounding plants. Soil samples collected by Park Service biologists showed elevated levels of radiation that decayed to normal levels within 48 hours. The most unsettling discovery came when the hikers returned with a ranger to investigate further. The circular patch had vanished completely, with the vegetation appearing undisturbed, as if nothing had ever occurred there. The official explanation attributed the incident to ball lightning, though this phenomenon has never been documented in Colorado and would not account for the geometric precision of the burned area or the radiation readings. It was September 3, 2014, when 2 backpackers discovered the audio recorder lying half-buried in the mud near the Animas River in Chicago Basin, a remote wilderness area accessible only by train or a multi-day hike. The backpackers, experienced hikers familiar with the region, immediately recognized the device as professional-grade equipment similar to what park rangers use for field notes. Curious about its contents, they replaced the batteries and played the most recent recording, expecting to find nature sounds or perhaps a lost hiker's final message. What they heard instead would become one of the most disturbing audio artifacts in Colorado Ranger history. The recording, approximately 47 minutes long, captured the deteriorating mental state of Ranger Thomas Granger during what appeared to be his final patrol in the basin. Granger had been assigned to monitor wildlife populations in the remote area, a solo assignment that required him to camp for 5 days in the wilderness. The recording begins with his professional voice describing the day's activities, observations of elk herds, weather conditions, and notes on vegetation changes. As the recording progresses, however, Granger's tone shifts from professional to concerned, then to fearful. At approximately the 12-minute mark, he describes hearing what sounds like whistling from multiple directions, though the sound seems to move in ways that defy the acoustics of the canyon walls. "It's like they're playing with me," he whispers, his voice barely audible above the wind. One whistles from the east, I turn, and immediately another starts from the west. But there's no one there. I've scanned the ridges with binoculars, nothing. The recording becomes increasingly fragmented as night falls on Granger's 3rd day in the basin. He describes seeing movement at the edge of his vision, figures that disappear when he turns to look directly at them. "They're trying to get me to leave," he says, his voice strained. "Every time I set up a camera trap, it's gone in the morning. Not knocked over or taken, just vanished, as if it never existed." At the 27-minute mark, Granger's breathing becomes ragged, and he can be heard attempting to contact dispatch on his radio, though only static responds. "The coordinates are wrong," he says, frustration evident in his voice. "I've been following this creek for hours, but I keep ending up back at this same rock formation. It's like the whole landscape is shifting when I'm not looking directly at it." The final 10 minutes of the recording consist primarily of heavy breathing, occasional whimpers, and what sounds like Granger stumbling through undergrowth. At approximately the 42-minute mark, he begins speaking in a conversational tone, though no other voices can be heard on the recording. "I understand now," he says, his voice suddenly calm. "You're not trying to hurt me. You're trying to show me something." This is followed by 3 minutes of what sounds like Granger walking steadily, his footsteps accompanied by the soft padding of what might be bare feet on the forest floor. The recording ends abruptly with Granger saying, "Oh, it's beautiful," followed by a sound that the audio experts who later analyzed the recording described as similar to a large membrane being stretched. Then silence. The backpackers who found the recorder turned it over to authorities in Durango, where it was analyzed by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Ranger Thomas Granger was officially listed as missing, with search parties dispatched to Chicago Basin. What they found only deepened the mystery. At the coordinates mentioned in Granger's field notes, they discovered his campsite, undisturbed as if he had simply stepped away for a moment. His tent was set up, his sleeping bag unrolled, and a partially eaten meal sat cooling beside a cold fire pit. No signs of struggle were evident, and the surrounding area showed no indication of where Granger might have gone. The most disturbing discovery was a series of footprints leading away from the campsite, Granger's boot prints walking alongside smaller, barefoot prints that appeared suddenly in the middle of his tracks, as if their owner had materialized from thin air. The search for Granger lasted 12 days, involving over 50 volunteers and professionals from multiple agencies. No trace of him was ever found beyond the initial footprints, which themselves disappeared after approximately 100 yards, with Granger's tracks simply ceasing alongside the barefoot prints. The recorder was authenticated as Granger's, with voice analysis confirming that it was indeed him on the recording. Audio experts could not identify the source of the whistling sounds or the membrane-like noise at the end of the recording. The case remains officially unsolved, with Granger's file at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office marked as missing, circumstances unknown. The recording itself has been designated as evidence, though copies have circulated among paranormal researchers who note the chilling similarity between Granger's final words and those reported in other cases of missing persons in wilderness areas across the country. It was the first week of October 2018 when Ranger Elena Morales began her seasonal assignment at the Great Sand Dunes National Park in the Sangre de Cristo Range of southern Colorado. The park, known for its massive dunes rising against the backdrop of rugged mountains, presented a unique environment for law enforcement, a combination of desert terrain and alpine wilderness that required specialized knowledge. Morales had transferred from a post in Arizona, seeking the cooler temperatures and different challenges of the Colorado high country. Her first week proceeded normally, with routine patrols, visitor assistance, and wildlife monitoring. It was during her second week, on a solo overnight trek, to monitor mountain lion activity in the remote eastern section of the park, that she experienced something that would fundamentally alter her understanding of the natural world she had sworn to protect. Morales established her base camp at approximately 8,500 feet in a small valley surrounded by ponderosa pines and aspens beginning their autumn transformation. The evening of October 9th was unseasonably warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of juniper and dry earth. As she completed her camp chores, Morales noted an unusual silence. Even the crickets seemed muted, as if holding their breath. At 7:43 p.m., as she was preparing to retire for the night, she heard what sounded like a large animal moving through the trees beyond her camp. Grabbing her flashlight and sidearm, Morales stepped out of her tent, sweeping the beam across the darkness. The forest floor was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that would normally betray the presence of wildlife, yet she saw nothing moving despite the continued sounds of movement. What troubled her most was the nature of the sounds, not the snapping of twigs or rustling of leaves that would indicate a four-legged animal, but something more deliberate, as if someone were walking carefully but making no attempt to conceal their presence. The sounds continued intermittently throughout the night, sometimes seeming to circle her camp, other times retreating into the distance before returning. Morales, trained in wilderness survival and familiar with the behavior of local wildlife, could identify no animal that would behave in such a manner. At 2:17 a.m., she heard what sounded like whispering just beyond the ring of her flashlight's beam. Though she could distinguish no words, the cadence was unmistakably human. Calling out received no response, and the whispering ceased as if it had never occurred. Morales remained awake until dawn, her hand never straying far from her sidearm, her ears straining to identify the source of the disturbances. When the first light of morning revealed the forest around her camp, she found no tracks, no broken branches, no evidence whatsoever that anything had been there during the night. What happened the following evening would cement the incident as one of the most disturbing in the park's history. Morales, deciding to cut her monitoring short due to the unsettling events of the previous night, was packing her gear when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the clearing, approximately 100 yards from her camp, was a tall figure dressed in what appeared to be ranger clothing. The figure was perfectly still, facing her direction, though with the setting sun behind it, she could make out no features. Raising her binoculars, Morales attempted to identify the person, expecting to find another ranger or perhaps a lost hiker. What she saw instead defied explanation, and the figure appeared to be unnaturally tall, at least 7 feet, with proportions that seemed subtly wrong, as if stretched vertically. When Morales radioed dispatch to report her location and request identification of any other personnel in the area, the static that answered her call was so intense that it caused her radio to emit a high-pitched whine before falling completely silent. The most terrifying aspect of the encounter came when Morales lowered her binoculars and looked again with her naked eyes. The figure was gone, yet no sound of movement had reached her, and there was nowhere for something of that size to hide in the open meadow. Scanning the tree line with her binoculars revealed nothing, yet when she looked again without them, she had the unsettling sensation that the figure was still there, somehow just beyond her ability to see it clearly. This visual paradox continued for several minutes, the figure visible only through the binoculars, never with her naked eyes, yet somehow present regardless. Morales abandoned most of her gear, taking only her essential equipment and weapon as she hiked rapidly out of the area, not stopping until she reached the park boundary as darkness fell. Morales filed a detailed report upon her return, which was documented in case file GSDNP 2018-0992. The report included sketches of the figure she had observed, as well as a thorough description of the auditory phenomena she had experienced. Park administrators conducted an investigation, finding no other personnel in the area and no record of any visitors matching the description Morales provided. The most chilling discovery came when a team returned to her campsite to recover her abandoned gear. They found her tent collapsed, all her equipment scattered as if by animal activity. Yet the ground showed no tracks other than Morales' own footprints. Even more disturbing, every battery-powered device she had left behind had been completely drained of power, including items with fresh batteries that should have lasted for weeks. Morales requested and received an immediate transfer, leaving the Colorado Park Service entirely within 6 months. The official explanation listed unidentified persons as the cause of the incident, though privately, those who reviewed her case acknowledged that something occurred in that valley that defies conventional understanding of the natural world. It was early May 2016 when the unseasonable blizzard descended upon the Mosquito Range of central Colorado, trapping 4 park rangers in a small cabin near Hoosier Pass. Ranger James Wilson, the senior member of the team, had spent 20 years working in the Colorado high country and had never seen a storm develop with such speed and intensity. What made this particular storm unusual was not just its timing arriving weeks after the normal snow season had ended, but its behavior. The Weather Service had predicted clear skies for the entire week. Yet by mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to an unnatural purple-gray, and snow began falling with a density that Wilson had never witnessed. The rangers, who had been conducting trail maintenance in the area, quickly made their way to the emergency cabin, standard procedure for unexpected weather events in the backcountry. The first 12 hours of the storm proceeded as expected, with the rangers securing the cabin, checking their supplies, and monitoring the radio for weather updates. By the second day, however, things began to deviate from any known meteorological patterns. The snow, which should have accumulated several feet deep, remained at a consistent depth of approximately 8 inches around the cabin, as if some invisible force were preventing it from building up. The wind, which should have been howling through the mountain passes at such an elevation, remained eerily silent, with the snow falling straight down despite the rangers' observations of trees bending as if in high winds when viewed through the cabin windows. Most disturbing was the temperature, which remained exactly 22 degrees Fahrenheit, never fluctuating despite the passage of day and night, as if the storm were being artificially maintained. On the third day of their isolation, Ranger Lisa Chen noted another anomaly while watching through the cabin window. The snow falling outside appeared to be avoiding certain areas of the ground, creating patterns that resembled large footprints or pathways. When Wilson went outside briefly to check the cabin's exterior, he discovered that the snow was indeed accumulating in unnatural ways, forming geometric patterns, avoiding certain rocks and trees while heavily coating others. What chilled him to the bone was the discovery of a perfect circle approximately 20 feet in diameter around the cabin, where no snow accumulated at all, despite the blizzard raging just beyond its boundary. The air inside this circle was noticeably warmer than the surrounding area, though Wilson could identify no source for this temperature difference. The most terrifying aspect of their experience came on the fourth night, when Ranger Marcus Thompson, who had been monitoring the radio throughout the storm, received a transmission that defied explanation. "We have your coordinates," the voice said, though it was not any voice recognized from normal dispatch channels. "The storm is a container. Do not attempt to leave the circle." When Thompson attempted to respond, the radio emitted only static, yet the voice continued as if receiving his unspoken questions. "They are watching you. They have always watched you. The storm keeps you safe from them, but it cannot hold forever." The transmission continued in this vein for approximately 7 minutes, with the voice offering cryptic warnings about the watchers and the spaces between, before cutting off abruptly, replaced by the normal sound of wind through the radio speaker. When the storm finally ended on the 6th day, disappearing as suddenly as it had arrived, the Rangers emerged to find a landscape transformed in ways that defied meteorological explanation. The snow that had fallen during their isolation had vanished almost entirely, with only the strange geometric patterns remaining as evidence that it had ever existed. The vegetation around the cabin showed signs of advanced growth that should have taken weeks to occur, with some plants already flowering as if midsummer had arrived. Most disturbing were the tracks leading away from the cabin. Not the boot prints of the Rangers, but something else entirely, with impressions that suggested a weight far exceeding that of any human or animal native to the region. The tracks extended for approximately 50 yards before simply ending in the middle of an open meadow, with no indication of where their maker might have gone. The official report filed by Wilson and his team was heavily redacted before being archived under reference MR 2016-0512. The Weather Service could offer no explanation for the anomalous storm, which had not appeared on any radar or satellite imagery despite its clearly visible effects. The cabin's instruments showed no record of the temperature remaining constant. Yet each ranger independently confirmed this observation. The radio transmission was analyzed by experts, who could determine only that it had originated from a location within 3 miles of the cabin, though no personnel or equipment were found in the area. The case remains officially classified as unusual meteorological event, Though privately, those who reviewed the ranger's testimony acknowledged that what they experienced in the Mosquito Range that week defies not just meteorological understanding, but perhaps our understanding of reality itself. It was June 2019 when Ranger David Takota began documenting the unusual stone arrangements appearing throughout the foothills of the Front Range near Boulder. Takota, who had worked in the area for 6 years and was familiar with local Native American history, initially dismissed the formations as the work of hikers or New Age practitioners creating meditation circles. What troubled him, however, was the complexity and apparent age of some of these structures, which seemed to appear overnight in locations that were difficult to access and rarely visited. The formations varied in design, but shared certain characteristics, precise geometric patterns, stones that appeared to have been cut or shaped with tools, and arrangements that suggested knowledge of astronomical alignments. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of these formations corresponded to legends told by the Arapaho people about stone people who lived in the mountains before the arrival of humans. The first significant discovery came on June 17th, when Takota was responding to a report of unusual activity near the Chautauqua Park trailhead. What he found was not the expected group of teenagers or unauthorized campers, but a series of stone circles arranged in a spiral pattern approximately 50 feet in diameter. The stones themselves were unusual granite that appeared to have been smoothed and shaped with precision that would have required modern tools. Yet the moss growth and weathering suggested they had been in place for decades, if not centuries. What truly disturbed Takota was the discovery at the center of the spiral. A single stone pillar approximately 6 feet tall, carved with symbols that matched those described in Arapaho legends as belonging to the Stone People, who were said to inhabit the mountains before humans arrived. As the summer progressed, more formations appeared throughout the Front Range, each more complex than the last. Takota documented over 30 sites, photographing each and recording GPS coordinates for future reference. What he found most troubling was the apparent intelligence behind their placement, as the formations seemed to create a larger pattern when viewed from above, suggesting a design that encompassed the entire foothills region. When Takota shared his findings with archaeologists at the University of Colorado, they were initially dismissive, suggesting the formations were modern creations. However, when carbon dating of organic material found beneath some of the stones returned dates ranging from the 1920s to as early as the 1870s, they began to take a more serious interest. The symbols carved into the stones remained undecipherable, though they bore similarities to petroglyphs found throughout the American Southwest. The most unsettling incident occurred on August 3rd, when Takota was investigating a newly reported formation near the summit of Mount Sanitas. As he approached the site, he heard what sounded like chanting in a language he didn't recognize, though the sound seemed to come from multiple directions at once. When he reached the formation, a series of standing stones arranged in what appeared to be a representation of the constellation Orion, he discovered something that defied explanation. Among the stones were what appeared to be footprints, not in the soil around the formation, but fossilized in the stones themselves, as if whatever had made them had walked when the stones were still molten. The prints were not human. They were longer and narrower than any human foot, with what appeared to be 3 toes and a heel that curved backward. Most disturbing was the discovery that the prints were all oriented toward the east, as if whatever had made them had all been looking in the same direction when the stones solidified. Takota's investigation took a darker turn on August 22nd, when he received a call from a hiker who had discovered what appeared to be a human body near one of the formations. The victim was a professor of archaeology from the university who had been conducting unauthorized research on the stone arrangements. What made the discovery particularly disturbing was not just the circumstances of the death, which appeared to be from natural causes, despite the professor's relatively young age, but what was found around his body. The professor had been arranging small stones in a pattern that matched one of the larger formations, and in his hand was a stone tablet covered in symbols similar to those found on the standing stones. The autopsy revealed no signs of foul play, yet toxicology reports showed unusual trace elements in the professor's bloodstream that the coroner could not identify. The official investigation into the stone formations was quietly closed after the professor's death, with the Park Service issuing a statement attributing the arrangements to unidentified individuals and warning visitors not to disturb them. Takota was reassigned to a different district, though he continued to document the formations in his personal time. What he discovered in the months that followed only deepened the mystery. The formations continued to appear, sometimes in locations that had been thoroughly searched just days before. The most disturbing development came when Takota installed motion-activated cameras near several active sites. The cameras captured nothing on video, yet the formations still appeared overnight, as if whatever was creating them existed outside the spectrum of visible light or moved in ways that the cameras could not record. The case remains officially unsolved, with the formations now treated as part of the park's cultural resources. Though privately, those who have studied them acknowledge that they represent a phenomenon that defies not just archaeological understanding, but perhaps our understanding of time itself. It was late September 2020 when Ranger Jennifer Harding led a group of 6 hikers on a 3-day trek through the Weminuche Wilderness in the San Juan Mountains. Harding was an experienced guide with over a decade of leading expeditions through Colorado's most remote areas. The group, consisting of experienced hikers in their 30s and 40s, had planned a challenging route that would take them to several high-altitude lakes before returning to civilization. The first 2 days of the expedition proceeded normally, with the group covering approximately 15 miles per day through spectacular autumn scenery. It was on the 3rd day, as they approached Willow Lake at an elevation of 11,690 feet, that something began to go wrong, though none of them would realize how wrong until it was too late. The first indication that something was amiss came when Harding checked her GPS device and discovered that it was showing their position as approximately 2 miles west of where she knew they were. The device had functioned perfectly the previous day, and Harding had changed the batteries that morning. Yet it now insisted they were in a completely different location. When she attempted to recalibrate the device using the surrounding landmarks, it refused to accept the corrections, instead showing an error message that read, "Location not found on current maps." The hikers, all experienced with navigation equipment, found similar issues with their personal devices, though none could explain the simultaneous malfunction of multiple units from different manufacturers. Harding, relying on her extensive knowledge of the area, assured the group that they were on course and would reach Willow Lake by early afternoon. What happened next would become one of the most puzzling missing person cases in Colorado history. As the group continued toward the lake, they began experiencing visual distortions that Harding later described in her partial report as similar to heat haze, though the temperature was cool and the air was still. The landscape ahead of them seemed to ripple and shift, with familiar landmarks appearing and disappearing between blinks. Several hikers reported seeing movement at the edge of their vision, though when they turned to look directly, nothing was there. The most disturbing observation came from one of the hikers, a photographer who noted that the light in the area had become unnatural, with shadows falling in directions that didn't correspond to the position of the sun. Harding, growing increasingly concerned, decided to turn the group back toward their previous night's campsite, a decision that may have saved her life, but would haunt her forever. The return journey quickly descended into chaos. The trail that they had followed that morning seemed to have vanished. with the forest floor appearing undisturbed, as if they had never passed through. Harding, relying on her compass and topographical knowledge, attempted to navigate back to familiar territory. But the landscape seemed to shift around them, with ridges and valleys appearing where none had existed just hours before. As darkness fell, the group made camp in a small clearing, their anxiety growing as they realized they were truly lost in a wilderness that suddenly seemed alien and hostile. It was during the night that the first member of the group vanished. One of the hikers went to answer the call of nature and never returned, despite extensive searching in the immediate area. The following morning brought even more terror. Harding awoke to discover that only 2 of the remaining hikers were still in the camp. The others had vanished from their sleeping bags sometime during the night, with no signs of struggle or indication of where they might have gone. Their equipment remained behind, including boots and jackets that would have been essential for survival in the high country. Harding and the 2 remaining hikers, now thoroughly panicked, attempted to find their way out of the wilderness. But the terrain continued to shift in impossible ways. What made the situation even more terrifying was the discovery that their compasses were spinning uselessly, and the sun seemed to hang motionless in the sky, neither rising nor setting as the hours passed. Harding was the only one to emerge from the Weminush wilderness. 9 days after the group first went missing, she was found wandering along a forest road approximately 20 miles from where the expedition was supposed to have taken place. She was dehydrated, exhausted, and suffering from hypothermia, but otherwise unharmed. Her account of what had happened to the other hikers was fragmented and contradictory, with gaps in her memory that corresponded to the times when the other hikers had disappeared. Search parties dispatched to locate the missing individuals found no trace of them, despite covering over 200 square miles of terrain. The official investigation, documented in case file WWW-20220-094, concluded that the hikers had likely become disoriented and succumbed to the elements. Though this explanation failed to account for the bizarre phenomena described by Harding, or the complete absence of any evidence, tracks, or remains. What makes the Willow Lake incident particularly disturbing is not just the disappearance of 5 experienced hikers, but the physical evidence that was discovered in the aftermath. Harding's camera, which had been recovered when she was found, contained several photographs taken during the expedition. The final images, time-stamped at 3:47 p.m. on the day the group went missing, showed something that defied explanation. Standing among the trees behind the smiling hikers were tall, thin figures that appeared to be made of the same material as the trees themselves, blending almost perfectly with the forest. The figures were only visible when the images were enhanced and digitally processed, suggesting that they might have been partially transparent or existing outside the normal spectrum of visible light. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery that Harding's GPS device, which had been recovered along with her other equipment, now functioned perfectly, showing no record of the malfunctions she had reported. The case remains officially unsolved, with the 5 hikers still listed as missing, presumed dead. Harding never returned to work as a ranger, leaving Colorado entirely within 6 months of her rescue. The official explanation attributes the incident to extreme weather conditions and navigation errors. Though privately, those who reviewed her case acknowledged that something occurred in the Weminush wilderness that week that defies not just our understanding of nature, but perhaps our understanding of reality itself. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly in the heights of the Colorado Rocky Mountains, where rangers patrol the boundaries between civilization and wilderness. These 8 cases, drawn from official reports and witness testimony, represent only a fraction of the unexplained events that occur each year in America's protected lands. What connects them is not just their location or the profession of those involved, but the unsettling suggestion that there are forces at work in these wild places that operate beyond our current understanding of nature and reality. In each account, we see patterns that emerge across time and distance. The manipulation of technology, the distortion of natural laws, the presence of entities that seem to exist just beyond our ability to perceive them clearly. We hear in the testimony of these rangers not fear or superstition, but the quiet unease of trained observers witnessing phenomena that defy their expertise and experience. These are not stories told for entertainment or profit, but documented events that continue to resist explanation, leaving those who experience them forever changed by what they saw in the mountains as they had sworn to protect. What is perhaps most haunting about these cases is not what they reveal, but what they conceal, the vast silence that follows each encounter, the absence of answers that might provide closure to those left behind. In the Colorado Rockies, as in wilderness areas across America, there are places where the veil between worlds seems thin, where the normal rules of existence appear to bend or break altogether. The rangers who work these lands accept this uncertainty as part of their job. Though privately, many acknowledge that there are things in the mountains that were there long before humans arrived and will remain long after we are gone. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences serves not only as a record of the unexplained, but as a warning to those